Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to be with you. My name is Matt Potts. I am the Senior Project Officer at the Embrace Multicultural Mental Health Project. As I said, really great to be joining with you all today on behalf of the Embrace team, and really looking forward to what will hopefully be a really useful webinar exploring what is cultural responsiveness and why is it important for mental health care in multicultural Australia. I'll talk in a moment about the purpose and outline for our time today, but before that, a couple of quick notes. Closed captions are available on Zoom today, so if you need those, please head to the control panel in Zoom and you should be able to turn them on or off as needed for yourself. Just to note too that this webinar will be recorded as part of a series of webinars that we're planning for the next year. So this will be kept on the Embrace website, and it will be available for people to view within the next few weeks if there's people who you know who weren't able to attend today. The chat will be disabled today during the webinar, but we do really encourage questions via the Q&A function. So please add these into the chat, the Q&A function as you think of them throughout the webinar, and we'll have a time at the end for Q&A. We also have a survey at the end of our time today, so really encourage you to fill that out if possible. It really helps us understand what was helpful and what we can refine as well for future webinars, as well as think of topics for future webinars. I'd like to acknowledge First Nations peoples as the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, sea, and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures and to all elders, both past and present. And at Embrace, we express our support for voice, treaty, and truth-telling. I'm fortunate today to be joining from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I acknowledge the many different lands that people are joining from today based on the participants that we've seen register. I'd also like to recognise the unique contribution of people with lived experience of mental ill health and those who love and care for them in championing mental health reform. At Embrace, we celebrate people of all backgrounds, genders, sexualities, cultures, bodies, and abilities. So the purpose of today's webinar is to provide an introduction to cultural responsiveness and explore why it's crucially important for mental health care in Australia. As I said, today's webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're planning at Embrace over the next year to explore cultural responsiveness and to link to key areas of the Embrace framework for multicultural or for mental health in multicultural Australia. And I'll talk more about the framework in a moment. Today's webinar is intended for mental health services, but we welcome others who may be joining today as well. We're looking today to explore a foundational understanding and commitment to the journey of cultural responsiveness. We'll be exploring this with a fantastic speaker and hear some practical examples of what cultural responsiveness can entail. As I said, we're very fortunate to have a great speaker today, Siri Gunawardana, who's the manager of the Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Health. We're also very fortunate to have Zainab Al-Halali, who's a member of the Embrace Lived Experience group, who will be joining our Q&A session towards the end of the time together today. So please feel free, as I said, to add in questions as you think of them. I'll provide an introduction to the topic today and a bit of background on the Embrace project and the framework, and then I'll pass to Siri, who will share from her expertise and experience. We really hope, as I said, that there's a lot that you can get from the webinar today. For those who aren't aware of Embrace Multicultural Mental Health Project, Embrace is part of Mental Health Australia and is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health and Aged Care. Embrace provides a national focus on mental health and suicide prevention for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. At Embrace, we work to improve the cultural responsiveness and workforce of mental health and suicide prevention services, and also look to work alongside communities to increase mental health awareness, literacy, and capacity. The Embrace website is a great place to learn about our work and also provides access to some tools and resources that can support both services, mental health services, and community members. And that includes translated materials, a knowledge hub, some best practice examples and lived experience stories, case studies, and of course, a link to the Embrace framework, which, as I said, I'll explore some more in a moment. So why is cultural responsiveness important for mental health care in Australia? We know that Australia is a multicultural country with over 51% of Australians either being born overseas or having a parent who was. When we talk about multicultural or culturally and linguistically diverse people, sometimes shortened to CALD, we are referring to those from diverse, often non-English speaking backgrounds who are not from the Anglo-Celtic population of Australia or from First Nations communities. We know that for multicultural communities, that there are a diversity of experiences as well as cultural identities that all contribute to mental health and well-being and understandings of mental health and well-being. When talking of multicultural populations, we're talking about groups of people that might include people from refugee backgrounds, people that have arrived to Australia seeking asylum, who've been forced to flee their homes, people who come to Australia as international students, and also migrants who've chosen to make Australia home. So it's important that we recognize that these unique experiences and pathways, as well as cultural identities, can mean that people carry unique strengths and protective factors, as well as risk factors for mental ill health. For example, we know that in Australia, people with refugee experiences often bring incredible strength, resilience, and skills, sometimes which is overlooked. But research also shows us that people from refugee backgrounds and people seeking asylum often are at higher risk of psychological distress in Australia because of the impact of pre-arrival experiences and stresses, including exposure to traumatic events in the context of organized violence or persecution, and also resettlement stresses. And we know that there's a range of post-arrival experiences that people can experience and can impact on multicultural communities more generally, including family separation, loss of community supports, and experiences of racism, all of these which can impact on mental health. So in thinking about what cultural responsiveness is, and what it might look like within service delivery, it's important to understand it as an integral area of practice that's relevant across multiple and many roles and professions. Cultural responsiveness involves responding effectively to culturally diverse communities' mental health needs and having a commitment for building an ongoing effective practice in supporting people. Part of cultural responsiveness is gaining an understanding of who CALD communities are and engaging with them in partnership, moving to seek to co-design and co-develop mental health supports. As an example of this, we know that many multicultural communities come from more collectivist cultures than the individualist cultures, which can be more dominant in contexts such as Australia. This may mean moving services from more individually focused to models of community care or programming, which might, for example, look like group work or community engagement programs. We know that cultural responsiveness is both individual and systemic and involves action on both fronts. Systemic cultural responsiveness might include, for example, how organizational policies enable effective interpreter use, or how we hire a culturally appropriate staff for the communities we're working with, or how we understand local communities through effective data collection. Individual practice of cultural responsiveness often requires us to engage in self-reflection, seeking to understand how culture impacts us as workers and our services, and understand our biases and values as well, and thinking about how we might communicate well with people from multicultural backgrounds, and some key practices such as showing curiosity. Cultural responsiveness is also trauma-informed, recognizing the impact that traumatic experiences can have on some of the communities that we have in Australia. And this can mean often, prioritizing giving people choice and autonomy and building in those trauma-informed care practices. Key principles of cultural responsiveness are applicable across mental health and health settings. Uh, the practice and the ins and outs of these across professions and particular roles might vary, however. So it's crucial that mental health support and suicide prevention services are for everyone in the community. We know that there is some evidence that multicultural communities access mental health services less than others, despite some of the unique needs that we've described. We know that there are long-standing inequities and barriers for multicultural communities. There's a recognition that much of mental health service structure, theory, and practice can often emerge from Western traditions. So this can provide a barrier for people to access services. Another barrier may be, services not being attuned to community or particular community or individual needs. Culture and beliefs are significant for how people discuss and understand mental health. This can present opportunities for healing, strengths, as I said, for support, but also barriers. We know that mental health stigma can be a barrier in some communities, and there can be unique stigmas as well. It's important to understand from communities the nuance of language and culture so we can more effectively work alongside people. And also cultural responsiveness is an ongoing practice. It's not an endpoint. And I'm sure there's many experienced people joining the webinar today who would attest to that it's a practice that we're constantly engaging in and learning and kind of never ending in that sense. So as I mentioned, the framework for mental health in multicultural Australia is a tool that we have developed at Embrace and is an excellent place for people to access support and information around enhancing cultural responsiveness in your services. So it's a free online available tool, and I'll include the link in a moment, for enhancing and reflecting on cultural responsiveness within mental health and suicide prevention services. The framework consists of an introductory module and then 4 core service modules, and can help provide a guide as to how services can improve in their cultural responsiveness, touching on some of the areas that we've described already today. The framework is based around key principles, and it's mapped against national standards and transferable again across different contexts and roles. A real strength of the framework is that you can work through it at your own pace and revisit it, to sort of assess progress across your organization and individually. And it also includes a range of resources that are linked to the modules and can provide, further information and deep diving around some of those practices and principles that are outlined in the framework. So the framework can help build capacity of organizations, as I've said, to work effectively with multicultural communities, turning principles into tangible actions and thinking about practical actions for organizations and individual practitioners as well. It can provide a process for assessing capability and improving capability over time in a really intentional way. So as I said, the framework is free to access, and I encourage you to check it out if you haven't looked already. You can follow the link in the chat or scan the QR code there. The introductory module of the Embrace framework, as I mentioned, there's 4 service modules or key modules in the framework. But there's an introductory module as well that is provided by the Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Health that serves as a really excellent starting point in thinking about cultural responsiveness before jumping into those key service modules. And that leads me to introduce our key speaker for today. Real pleasure to introduce Siri Gunawandana, who is the manager at the Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Health. For over 20 years, Siri has been a passionate community development and training practitioner across the multicultural sector. And as manager of CEH, she develops, innovates, evaluates, and leads initiatives to improve health and well-being outcomes for multicultural communities. So thank you very much, Siri, for joining us, and I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having us today. We at CH are coming from Melbourne, and have we got the slides up at the moment? We'll get that, yeah, because I went to some trouble with some exciting visuals, so good to have the slides to go through. But while we're waiting, so we're based in Melbourne, but we work across Australia with organisations to assist them to work more effectively with migrant and refugee communities. And we've been working with Embrace for a number of years now and supporting their framework. And with CH cultural competence training, we have that integrated into the framework. And so we use a cultural competence module framework, which is very, very complementary to the cultural responsiveness framework for mental health. So I'm going to take you through some of the principles that we have.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to let you know, the slides are up there so people can see them.
Okay, great. I can't see them. So what I'll do is I'll do some visual, some verbal confirmations. Yeah, as we go through. So we should have up now the CH slide. And I will just quick plug for some of our other programs. We have Health Translations, which is a library of online translated resources from all over Australia, which is free to access. We link resources from all over Australia on different health and wellbeing topics, and there's quite a few on mental health. So you can find these resources, which could be audio-visual, could be documents for your clients, and search by language or search by topic, and you can share those by mobile. And we always ensure that the resources are translated by an accredited translator. And we also have Easy English resources and Auslan ones as well. So please check out translations. So as well as working on this webinar, we have our own webinar series and a library of free recorded webinars called our members page. So there should be a QR code to that as well. And so any topic on cultural competence and health literacy in general, we'll have on that. So we encourage you to visit that as well. And as Matt says, we work a lot on e-learning in CH and cultural competence, and that's part of the backbone of CH. And we have been working with hundreds of workers over the years in online and face-to-face workshops, and we put that expertise into the e-learning. So as well as the cultural competence e-learning that is part of the framework, we also have many other topics as well. Okay, so we'll move to the next slide, which is really trying to think about cultural responsiveness. And when we're to cultural responsiveness in mental health is hopefully like this clock face, which is nice and simple, or analog style clock face, not what we all have today with digital. But when we think about what does it take to make cultural responsiveness work, is really a lot behind the scenes. And that classic idea of the cogs and the things coming together as a system, and how we bring that together as well. So there's many different parts, and I'm just going to take you through a little bit of that now. So we'll go to the next slide there, and that should be some of our principles of cultural responsiveness. And what we encourage in our work is really thinking about this system of, cultural responsiveness, about having parts that organizations and the sector are responsible for. So, making sure that there's policies and procedures, resources for training, in governance, leadership and planning, and really thinking about cultural competence, and that's working. But also as a sector in mental health, are all the professions having cultural responsiveness in their code of ethics or other standards, practice standards, and having that flow through. So current workers in their professional development are working on this, as well as the workers of the future who are going through training and education as well. Yeah. And as well as that, having going down to the next part about really thinking about how we work as a sector, and thinking about our own cultural competence within what we do, and reflecting that. And I've got a few things there which I'll go through with you now. So really, I put at the bottom partnering with consumers and people who are affected by who have lived and lived experience about mental health. But I really think that has to be the core, as well as part of those systems, and thinking about the stuff, because we can't design the programs without having the people that we had in mind. And cultural responsiveness is only what is important to the people who it's affected by, and not just by what we think in the theory as well. And so then moving back up with those principles is having having a workforce which is, can really reflect on its own assumptions and biases. And I'll talk about an example in a minute, but also having that curiosity, that cultural responsiveness, as Matt sort of introduced, is, thinking about that diversity within Australia, thinking about your region, areas, and the groups that might be coming in. And also, what about those that, and the individual that you've got with you, or the group that you're working with, and what is nuanced about that as well. Yeah. And the other aspect of it is also having those cross-cultural communication skills that go with that curiosity, and thinking about values and how health beliefs impact the communication we have. And, other things that are not on that list as well are really thinking about plain language and how that goes into it, as well as working with interpreters is critical. And I'll have an example about that as well there. And given that I can't see what's there, have I missed one off the list?
I think you've covered everything. I can see everything you've covered. Thanks.
That just makes perfect, doesn't it, as well? So we're moving to the next slide, which should be that lanyard about working with interpreters. And so I wanted to give you a visual about what a systems approach can look like, because it's all very well saying it's about everything, about being everywhere, about, in an organization or in a industry as well. But when we work at CH in training, and we go to a lot of different organizations, different types. We've had some great workers who are, using great processes, working with interpreters, thinking about this, the unique context of working in mental health and other specialist areas. But sometimes we can even go in the same organization to another group, and they're not working as well, and they don't have everything in place. And that, how do we get that consistency, is a key question for organizations. So one of those ways is obviously to have a policy procedure about working with interpreters, but in an area like mental health, where you where the stigma, it's such a sensitive topic, you really want to get that right before the worker even goes to starting that process. And so what, you want that your policy and procedure to take in that context. What do you need to look for when you're booking? What do you need to look for when you're sending, when you're briefing that interpreter? So when you start that interaction, you're minimizing any issues that come past. And we also have other layers that even within an organization, some programs are fully funded to use interpreters, others may not. So what do you do in those situations? Having that all those layers taken away before even everyone starts, to give giving that interaction the biggest chance of success from there. So it's like really having that intentional policy and procedures in place, doing that. And so once that's done, of course you have to have it written down and kept somewhere. You need your training, you need people to go to ask for support or to centralize that. But what I found really interesting, and one of the things that sometimes drops off, is what is the best way to get that information across to people? How's that going to be? And so we've got this example of having what to do when you need an interpreter on a work lanyard from Mercy Health. And I think it's a really simple way that makes sure that the big intentions of the policy and procedures don't get dropped off, that anybody who's inducted or even casuals, whoever, everyone's going to get a lanyard, so it's going to be there. And I've been working in this sector for a long time, as Matt's pointed out, thanks. And in the old days, having things on your telephone was a really good way of that, because everyone used a landline telephone, which is obviously going out in there. But yeah, where are the ways that you're going to pick up everybody, and not just, because there'll be people who go out of their way to make sure they can get interpreter use on their priorities, but there are other workers that need more support or need that extension. So that's how that really sort of simple execution on the lanyard card, but there's a lot of systems and processes going on behind that to make sure we're going to get the most effective things. And of course, issues still arise, but hopefully we've minimized a lot of those. There. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. Excellent. And the simple smiley face. As I keep going back to being around the sector a long time, I'll have to stop that as part of my presentations. Makes me feel very old. But when we think about cultural competence, as I've worked in the sector for a long time, we had much more of a focus on workers thinking about others. And when I was in a migrant resource centre, when I first started, we had so many presentations on how to work with Sudanese clients, how to work with, elderly Chinese, a lot of those things. And there's a lot of value in those talks. But what we need as a workforce is not just to think about the nuances and cultural beliefs of others, but really start with ourselves. And so at CEH, unconscious bias is a very big part of what we do in that training, and really thinking about what are our preferences and the triggers that we have as workers, and how that can influence our work with the clients. And taking time and not just doing it once, but how can you come back to that regularly as part of your practice, and how can your team come back to that and really think about the assumptions behind what you do and what gets in the way. And I've been really privileged when training on this topic, to meet workers who are working in refugee health or areas with clients with a lot of vulnerabilities, but they're still able to think about this, because typically they should be the experts. They're working with people who have a lot of barriers, so we shouldn't have biases. But for them to take time as a group and think, okay, what are our biases and what are our assumptions, is really worthwhile, because we all have our blind spots and we all have things that we prefer, and we can't ignore that, and needing to find a way of doing that and having that done regularly across our busy lives, and taking a moment can be really a beneficial part of that. Okay, so we'll move to the next one. If I have a next slide, well, that could be the end.
That's the end of your slide, Siri.
the end. We're from those where, yeah. So basically, what cultural responsiveness. Those were some of the key principles that I really that we value in our work, and I really value personally as well. And it's, as Matt said, it's that journey, and whatever you do in building things to come back to that again will be, is really important. So it's not a one-off that you tick off, but yeah, doing that, reflecting, refining, and continuing on how that works.
Thank you so much, Siri, for for really, I think, grounding what we're talking about in some really practical examples, and for sharing your experience as well. And we'll have more of an opportunity now to hear from your experience as we go into a time of Q&A, and I'll click to the next slide as well. So yeah, please feel free, as I said at the start, to pop any questions that you have around what we're talking about today into the Q&A, and we'll now have some time with Siri, and also really grateful to have Zainab El Halali with us today, who is a member of the the Embrace Lived Experience group, who will also be participating in our Q&A time today. So yeah, I'll pass over as well to my colleague Aruj from the Embrace team, who will pull out some questions from the Q&A that have come through. Thanks, Aruj.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks to you and Siri for a great presentation. So we've got a few questions, and I'll start off with this one. So someone's asked, what is a good starting point to develop cultural responsiveness?
Perhaps I'll jump in, and then I'll give space for Siri or Zainab to jump in as well. I just wanted to plug in, I guess, that a really good starting point, I think, is the Embrace framework for multicultural mental health that we've spoken about already, which, as I said, includes as that introductory module, an introduction to cultural competence training that's provided by the Centre for Ethnicity and Health. So, really encourage you to check out the Embrace framework and the resources and tools that come through that as well, as a really good starting point for thinking about these practices and skills within your own practice and your organization.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so
yeah, and definitely, really talking about that reflective process with groups, organizations, and going on that journey with the framework is a great starting point. And I would just also add is, wherever you're at, if it's one person or two people interested in cultural responsiveness, or a whole team, don't feel you have to have everything in place, because what I'm seeing is a small group of dedicated people can start a change that gets taken up, and broadly influencing organizations more. So things like that lanyard done, executed well, then can lead to the next thing in the effort. But it's just having that framework, like the Embrace framework, to help you guide and see where you can go and what you can pick up next. We're really good. And we'd encourage any organization just to get started.
thanks, Siri. Do you want to add anything, Simon?
Yeah, I guess my perspective, being part of the Embrace Lived Experience group, which is, I've been part of it for the last few years. It's a group of diverse advocates in the mental health system all across Australia, who come from different cultural backgrounds, where we provide advice to Embrace and other mental health organizations and policies. But one of the biggest complaints that often we hear is that cultural responsive training or frameworks are not enough, and that they won't be enough to support I guess a staff member or a clinician in working with every single person from every single culture. And I guess just in terms of first steps is really just implementing those principles that Siri talked about. How do you create trust and rapport with the people that you work with, ensuring that the programs and the care that you provide is trauma informed, and also just being curious and providing a safe space for, I guess, individuals to share a bit about their culture, their faith, their background, and how that informs the care that they need. Yeah.
Thanks, and thank you all for sharing that. I think I answered the question well. We've got quite a few questions coming through, so I'll just read out the next one. So someone's asked, just checking, access to interpreters is not fully funded in all mental health settings. So would you want to answer that?
I wouldn't be the authority on that, but what I notice is in many organizations, some different programs have a different level of access. And so that's where, organizations often pool their resources and consider that in their approach to language services. Sure.
I think just to add to what Siri said, there certainly is, I think, a sort of mandate for interpreter use as best practice, as we know, and for government services or government funded services, there should be access to interpreter use. And I think, as Siri said, recognizing its importance, and part of, I guess, this cultural responsiveness journey might be advocating for how your organization can best utilize interpreters, or where those gaps might be. And as Siri said, partnering with other organizations to recognize that need that exists for interpreter use.
Thanks, Matt. So we have another question, which is, what are some ways that have worked to engage with otherwise withdrawn multicultural communities? Open the floor for any one of you to jump in.
I guess I'll jump in quickly. So part of, I guess, engaging, co-design and community engagement is really important in increasing access that multicultural communities have to mental health services. And so one of the biggest parts of supporting multicultural communities that are often withdrawn or might not feel comfortable, or who have might have stigma associated with accessing mental health care, is actually properly engaging with cultural community groups from the beginning. So if you're designing mental health programs, getting community leaders, organizations involved in the design, their perspectives, and looking at diverse ways of using their stories and perspectives and the experiences in that. So one great thing that Embrace Multicultural Mental Health does, the mental health program does, is has these community developed resources where there's been some funding to work with specific cultural and ethnic communities across Australia, and to identify particular issues associated with mental health and allow the community to create their own resources and their own initiatives to best support themselves. So this is community-led for community. And a lot of those programs have been really, really successful in starting the conversation, in increasing participation, in accessing support. So, what's great is those resources are available on the Embrace website for other community groups all across, and service providers to access. So just those examples are really good ways of demonstrating how actually proper engagement and involvement of cultural communities has been effective in getting them involved and bridging the gaps between access.
Thanks, Zanab. That was great. Matt, would you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Zanab. I think that's such a brilliant answer you've given. I think the approach of having curiosity about people that we're working with in communities, I think, and it's an aspect, I guess, of cultural responsiveness that I think is relevant to this question, and relevant to what's Anab has shared as well. How can we engage? How can we show interest in communities and understand their perspectives and needs and get alongside them, and recognize as well that sort of from I guess, a shared care approach, that there'll be other organisations, perhaps in our town or city, but also perhaps in wider Australia, who are working alongside different communities too. So how can we learn about how people are approaching working with different communities, and engaging in those ways of building trust and rapport with communities that might not be directly linked to what your service is already doing, but can really provide those inroads to help build that trust and collaboration around what those supports might look like.
Thanks, Matt. And that was a great answer. Moving on to the next question. So someone's asked, how can we remain consistent with knowing ourselves and self-reflection in our busy schedules, primarily for professionals who have been in the field for some time? And what does this look like at a practical level?
Do you want to start off?
If that's all right, Siri,
Yeah.
with your experience.
I was going to say the first thing is identifying that. So that's great, because I find the biggest danger to not being reflective on your biases is not thinking that there are any, or that you know everything, or not having that conscious sort of thought. So it is the longer you do something, you get, and the more time pressure you have, the more, I would say, mechanized that you become, because you've got to get through how many people a day. You need to, write notes for this, do that. So you have to have the process for doing things becomes so important because of the way you're funded and things like that. You need to short circuit that, and find those ways, which could be more training. It's also, you can't do that for yourself. It's, so it's so important in such important, in the hard work that is in the mental health sector, is for people to have teams that they can trust and feel vulnerable with, and in a friendly way open these conversations up, that it's not about someone's not doing well. It's about, how can we do better, and how can we, is there how can we do that with biases? And there's a whole lot of resources, and we've got in that webinar series that we have more on unconscious bias, and we can definitely put some more things on the slides before there. But it's having that process and making that time together with your team, and hopefully you have, and obviously some people are sole providers, but where can you make that team, where can you do that, and embed that and have that knowledge. And I think training is definitely can help, and but finding that way to have your own reflective group that can really meaningfully and regularly question those assumptions and biases.
Thanks, Ray. I think that was a very comprehensive answer to that. Very valuable. So someone's asked, how do you work with a group or a community who haven't really heard about mental health before, or have a term for mental health?
So Nab, did you want to jump in on this one? No pressure.
Sure. It's a difficult one, because a lot of cultures and languages don't have the words or the terms to describe mental health. But often, but what sort of it might be of assistance, especially for clinicians or staff who work directly with CALD or migrant refugee people who may be presenting with mental health issues and might be accessing support, is just asking more questions about how they're feeling, more around topics that are more associated with mental ill health, their sleep, their safety, whether they experience, discrimination, those sorts of topics might allude more. It's more around like how they're feeling in the present form might allow them to be more comfortable talking about their mental ill health. And I guess framing, changing the language more from being more clinical based to more simple, plain language, and framing it more into, I guess, a well-being perspective. How are you feeling in yourself, part of your family, part of your community? And I think that sort of change from medical jargon towards more accessible language will hopefully open the door for more further conversations down the track around mental health and accessing support.
Thanks, Anil. That was great. Just checking, Matt. Also, if you want to add anything before I read out the next question.
Not for me. That was a brilliant answer. Thanks, Anil.
Great answer to serve.
Great. So I have another good question, which is that how can services really build trust with communities that have historically been underserved or marginalized?
I was trying to remember some of the great answers you already had, Zina, but I'm sure you're coming in and read it. But I think once you flag those things that people have been underserved or marginalized, it should be really flagging to your organization or you that it's not a quick fix. That a lot of that, yes, and that's what I was remembering. Because is like you talk quite a bit about trust. I think that's a really important thing. It's not something that you just get once you start talking to people. How do you build that, and how can we build that into the work that you're doing? That it's not just you've got to get started and get to action, but you really need that. And I think some of the great projects that have been worked on by Embrace are really reflective of that, and coming to communities where they are and where they feel comfortable, and engaging in ways that do that. And things like attending important events for communities, like New Year's festivals or other things like that, building that trust and showing that you really want to know what is important for that community. Can be doing that, as well as really building what you can to have work that is transparent and that communities can genuinely influence as well.
I think, yeah, that's a great answer from Siri. And I think that emphasis on that, as we've said, that it might be engaging more at that collective level or community level, I think can often be really helpful. And I know that there's often lots of brilliant mental health services that come out of, services engaging in community events or community spaces where there's existing energy and conversations that are happening, and then that, building that trust in that environment. So again, thinking, I guess, sometimes outside of the box, even though it might be sort of outside of what service provision generally looks like, thinking how can we engage in those spaces and as Siri said, engage in that long-term journey of building trust, often with community.
Thanks, Matt and Siri. I think those were great answers. Just looking at the next question. So someone's asked, how can we avoid consultation fatigue when working with communities? And they've just asked if there's any general insights or learnings we might have that we can share. With a few comments they've added that there might be multiple organizations working with community, and community members might feel like they're having to repeat their experiences and re-describe kind of the challenges they've faced over and over again. So how do you And so they've asked, how do we kind of just avoid that consultation fatigue and kind of prevent people from having to continuously repeat themselves?
Jumping quickly, I think that's a really good question, because I think, we know, particularly, thinking of those with refugee experience, that having to retell people's stories, or talk about you know, stresses they're experiencing, or traumatic events that have happened in the past, or are happening, is often part of the refugee experience as people seek safety. And so again, I think the awareness within that question of that being a real trigger for people often, and communities, is really, really important. And again, I think that having that self-awareness around that, I think, informs then how do we interact with people and communities. How do we make sure that we're not replicating those um, uh, those questions that might be triggering, or approaching people with safety. And I think that's where that trauma-informed approach is really important, that we think about how we ask questions to people, recognizing that questions themselves can be sort of a trigger, how we approach people. And it might be that that's in less direct ways than we would normally through our work. And it may be, as we've said, that we're collaborating with other organizations too, and learning from other organizations and experts from communities about what's relevant for them, and what, recognizing that we won't necessarily need to know everything about a community to work effectively with them. But I think those starting points, of those soft entry points of how can we build trust and relationship, as Zainab and Siri have shared as well, I think is really important.
I'll just quickly jump in. I guess if we're also talking about consultation fatigue for, let's say, designing programs, or if there's a new policy and you need to engage with multicultural communities around their perspectives, I think the consultation fatigue is fair. A lot of communities experience that, and it comes from more of a place around cowed and marginalized communities often are the last to be engaged with in the consultation process. They're not involved in the beginning, and they don't know where their experiences or their perspectives go in terms of in this piece of work. So in terms of, if you're looking at improving or supporting multicultural communities and decreasing consultation fatigue, it's more around how do you effectively and meaningfully engage communities when you need their experiences and perspectives. And that's more around being clear, involving them from in the beginning of processes, being clear with them what their experiences and what their input is being used for in the process, and giving them a bit of time and to give that feedback, not very last minute, this piece of work or this policy submission is due. So just being aware of those small things can be really important in promoting more inclusive and effective engagement with multicultural communities.
Thanks, and that was a really great answer. And I think you have some really important points about, not including experiences towards the end of a program design. So I'd just like to say, I think we've answered all of the questions. And Matt, I think I'll hand over back to you now so that we can maybe share some resources and head towards closing off the webinar.
Thanks so much, Aruj. And I think, that's a brilliant note to end on. Thanks, Anab, for what you've shared just now. I guess, to wrap up our time together today, thank you so much for everyone that's joined today and participated through the question and answer. Some really great questions, and hopefully helpful discussion, and we recognize that this is an ongoing conversation, and as we've said, an ongoing area of work for lots of us. I want to say thank you very much as well to Zainab and Siri for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. And I think those who've joined have really gained a lot from what you've shared and from the insights that you've shared. So thank you both. As I said, this webinar will be part of a series of webinars that we're planning over the next year. So please keep in touch with the Embrace team, and you'll see communications about those webinars come up as they're planned. But we would love for you to fill out a feedback survey sort of to finish the time today, and it should hopefully take a few minutes for you to get through. As I said right at the start, really helpful for us to understand what's helpful, where we can refine these sorts of spaces as well for future webinars, and thinking of what's most helpful as well. Yeah, we are wrapping up a few minutes early, so you've got a few more minutes back in your day today for everyone that's joined. But yeah, just thanks again, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.